The hospital corridors were alive with the usual nighttime chaos: beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, and the low hum of fluorescent lights bouncing off sterile walls. Among the bustle, a quiet figure navigated the halls with calm precision. Elias Ward, the newest nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, carried himself differently than the others. His movements were deliberate, almost measured, as if every step, every action had a purpose beyond mere habit. Unlike the chatter and occasional laughter of the other staff, Elias rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was soft, yet firm enough to command attention without raising it. It was Elias' first week, and already he had drawn the attention of nearly everyone on the night shift. Some whispered about him in passing. "Who even is he?" a nurse asked as she hurried past. "He barely talks, and look at how slow he is," another replied, shaking her head. The words stung, but Elias remained unfazed. He didn't respond to gossip or the sideways glances of those who thought him insignificant. Elias' quiet demeanor made him an easy target. The nurses on the night shift, a tight-knit group used to camaraderie, immediately took to teasing him. "Grandpa Ward," one of them joked loudly in the break room, eliciting a few chuckles. "Does he even know how to start an IV, or is he still figuring out how to tie his shoes?" Yet beneath the mockery, there was a subtle undercurrent of curiosity. Patients and some of the more observant staff noticed things others overlooked. Elias' hands never shook, even when holding the most delicate instruments. His movements were precise and unhurried, yet never careless. There was a rhythm to his work that suggested not only competence but something more, an innate ability to sense the needs of those around him before they even spoke them. During one particularly chaotic night, a patient arrived in the ER after a car accident. Blood stained the sterile sheets and panic filled the room. The other nurses flailed for a moment, unsure where to begin. Elias moved forward with quiet authority. He checked vital signs with swift, practiced motions, his eyes scanning the patient's condition with unerring focus. "I've got it," he said softly, directing a nurse to fetch supplies. In minutes, he had stabilized the patient. The lead ER doctor, a veteran of 20 years, could only watch, impressed despite himself. While his colleagues whispered and gossiped, Elias worked in silence. He rarely engaged in small talk, preferring to let his actions speak for him. He remembered the countless nights during his previous life, nights of tension and danger, where hesitating or speaking out of turn could cost lives. The calm, methodical approach he displayed now had been drilled into him over years of training, but no one at the hospital could have guessed that. Outside the immediate chaos of patient care, Elias carried an air of mystery that intrigued some and irritated others. A nurse noticed faint scars on his forearms one evening and asked about them jokingly. "You get into bar fights in your spare time," she laughed. Elias glanced at her, offering a small, polite smile. "Old training," he replied and walked away, leaving her puzzled. The answer was so simple yet so enigmatic that no one dared press further. By the end of his first week, Elias had begun to attract a quiet respect, though it was mixed with suspicion. Some colleagues began to doubt their initial assumptions. How could someone so calm, so precise, and so effective remain so quiet in a place where personality often equaled influence? Yet Elias never sought recognition. He did not boast, did not argue, and certainly did not retaliate against those who mocked him. He existed almost as a ghost in the corridors, working tirelessly, observing silently, and stepping in only when necessary. One night the head nurse, Mara Jennings, decided to test him, not maliciously but out of curiosity. A patient with multiple lacerations arrived, bleeding profusely, and the team scrambled to respond. Elias immediately assessed the scene, issued instructions with concise clarity, and moved with the grace of someone trained under extreme pressure. Each action, from bandaging wounds to checking vital signs, was deliberate and efficient. Within moments, the patient's condition stabilized. Mara, who had watched the entire scene, realized this was no ordinary nurse. She caught Elias' eye and nodded in approval. Despite these moments of quiet brilliance, the gossip and mockery persisted, fueled by envy and misunderstanding. Some of the younger nurses felt threatened by his calm competence, unsure how to reconcile their teasing with the undeniable results he produced. "He's hiding something," one whispered to another. "There's no way someone this good just pops up out of nowhere." Elias, for his part, paid no mind to their speculations. He had long learned the value of patience and observation. In his previous life, he had relied on these qualities for survival. Now, in the relative safety of a hospital, they made him exceptionally effective, though few noticed the depth behind his quiet exterior. Even patients sensed the difference. A frail elderly woman struggling to breathe looked up at him with wide eyes. "You're different," she whispered. Elias simply smiled and reassured her, his calm presence radiating confidence. There was a warmth to him, an unspoken assurance that everything would be okay. It was the kind of presence that instantly earned trust, though it could not explain the air of mystery surrounding him. By the end of the week, Elias had settled into a rhythm, blending seamlessly into the night shift while quietly earning respect from the patients who mattered most. Yet the mocking and whispers from his colleagues hinted that his past, whatever it had been, would soon collide with the present. No one could have guessed how dramatically that collision would occur. A storm was approaching, not of weather, but of circumstance, one that would reveal the full extent of the quiet nurse's true identity. For now, Elias Ward remained calm, precise, and enigmatic, walking the halls with silent confidence, fully aware that his skills were needed far beyond the ordinary tasks of a hospital. And as he checked on the last patient before the night ended, adjusting a monitor with meticulous care, he glanced toward the parking lot, sensing something unusual. A faint tension rippled through him, subtle but undeniable. Whatever was coming, he knew he would be ready. For years, he had trained for moments like these. The world and the staff who mocked him had no idea how much more lay beneath the calm surface of the quiet new nurse. The days passed quietly, but each shift revealed more about Elias Ward than the staff could see at first glance. On the surface, he remained the same quiet, unassuming nurse, methodical, soft-spoken, precise. Yet subtle hints of his exceptional skill began to emerge, almost imperceptibly. It started with small moments, how he could anticipate what supplies a doctor would need before they even asked, or how he positioned a patient to minimize pain while maximizing efficiency. One night, the emergency room was busier than usual. A teenage boy had been in a bicycle accident, his leg trapped under the wheel. Blood pooled on the floor, his cries echoing down the hall. Nurses scrambled, unsure how to handle the chaos. The attending doctor barked orders, but the staff were inexperienced and panicked. Elias stepped forward without hesitation. His hands were steady, his gaze sharp. He assessed the boy's injuries in seconds, noting broken bones, severe abrasions, and the telltale signs of internal bleeding. He spoke softly but decisively. "I need the traction kit. Nurse Kim, assist me with the IV. Monitor his vitals fast." It was not just what he said, but how he moved. Every gesture was precise, efficient, controlled, almost choreographed. He lifted the boy with careful strength, aligning the fractured bones without a single unnecessary motion. The other nurses watched in awe, unable to keep up with the rhythm he created. Within minutes, the patient was stabilized, pain minimized, and his vitals steady. One of the senior nurses, who had been among the most vocal critics, whispered under her breath, "Where did he learn that?" She had been a nurse for over a decade, yet Elias moved with knowledge and skill beyond her comprehension. Even the attending doctor, a veteran of emergency medicine, paused, studying him with a mix of suspicion and admiration. "I've never seen someone handle trauma like that without hesitation," the doctor admitted quietly. Rumors began to swirl quietly among the staff. Some theorized that Elias must have been trained in a military hospital. Others guessed he had worked as a combat medic. A few wondered if he had prior experience in an elite emergency response team. Yet Elias never confirmed anything. He simply returned to his duties, methodically checking monitors, adjusting medications, and speaking softly to patients, offering reassurance and comfort. His calm presence began to affect the atmosphere of the hospital. Nurses who had mocked him now observed him closely, unsure whether they were witnessing genius, luck, or something else entirely. Patients noticed it too. A middle-aged man recovering from a heart attack remarked to his wife, "There's something about him. You feel like he knows exactly what to do before it even needs doing." Elias remained detached from the gossip, though he was keenly aware of it. In his previous life, he had learned the value of observation and discretion. He knew that appearances often masked reality and that underestimating someone could be a fatal mistake. Here, in a hospital far removed from the battlefield, those lessons still applied. His silence was not weakness. It was a tool, a shield, and a method to observe without interference. One night, a particularly difficult case arrived. A construction worker had fallen from scaffolding, suffering multiple fractures and a severe head injury. The ER was chaotic, monitors beeping frantically, staff shouting orders. Elias moved through the storm like a calm center, directing nurses with clear, precise commands. He positioned the patient for maximum safety while preparing him for surgery, ensuring that every step minimized further injury. Even the most skeptical nurses began to see the pattern. Elias did not act like a typical nurse. His knowledge of anatomy, trauma care, and rapid response protocols exceeded anything taught in their standard training. He anticipated complications before they occurred, prevented mistakes before they happened, and maintained an almost eerie calm under pressure. Yet it was not just skill, it was instinct. The way he read situations, predicted movements, and reacted without hesitation suggested years of training beyond the hospital walls. One young nurse, frustrated and flustered after failing to place an IV, watched Elias perform the procedure effortlessly. How does he do that?" she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Elias' reputation continued to grow, though he never sought attention. Patients praised his quiet efficiency, but he never basked in it. The mocking whispers from a few of the staff persisted, though increasingly with hesitation. Each time someone attempted to belittle him, he demonstrated, through calm competence, that they were mistaken. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Elias stayed late to check on a patient in critical condition. The attending doctor approached him, curiosity written across her face. "Elias, you move like someone trained in a combat zone. Were you ever a medic in the military?" she asked gently. Elias looked up, eyes calm but distant. "Old training," he replied again, the familiar phrase that both revealed and concealed the truth. Even the head nurse began to notice subtle patterns. How Elias anticipated emergencies before they escalated, how he issued orders with quiet authority, how his calm demeanor seemed to reassure even the most panicked patients. There was an almost tactical precision to everything he did: positioning, timing, communication. Every action was deliberate, efficient, and purposeful. Outside the hospital, Elias remained unassuming. He did not flaunt his skill, did not seek recognition, and did not socialize unnecessarily. He observed the world with quiet attentiveness, aware of threats, aware of patterns, aware of human behavior. In many ways, the hospital was a stage where his abilities could manifest, yet few realized the depth of his past experience. The quiet staff and patients began to sense something extraordinary about him, even if they could not articulate it. Some felt an inexplicable respect, others an unsettling curiosity. Whispers of former SEAL or combat medic circulated quietly, but no one dared press the matter. Elias' silence was a buffer, a protective barrier that maintained the mystique surrounding him. As part 2 of his story unfolded, the tension between perception and reality began to grow. Elias' skill could not be denied, but the true nature of his past remained hidden. The staff who mocked him were slowly learning that appearances could be deceiving. The quiet nurse, who seemed ordinary at first glance, was anything but. And in the back of his mind, Elias remained alert to the world outside the hospital walls. His instincts, honed through years of extreme circumstances, sensed that his past was not entirely behind him. There were signals, small and subtle, that suggested a storm was approaching, a storm that would soon demand the full measure of skill, courage, and experience Elias had kept hidden for so long. For now, he continued his work with quiet brilliance, stabilizing patients, earning respect without recognition, and demonstrating a mastery that left others both amazed and unsettled. The hospital had yet to see the full extent of his abilities, and the staff had no idea just how drastically their lives and their perceptions of Elias Ward were about to change. Little did anyone know, the quiet new nurse they had mocked would soon become the center of a drama none of them could have imagined, a moment that would reveal not only his extraordinary skill, but the secret past that had shaped him into the calm, brilliant, and deadly professional they now worked alongside. The hospital staff's opinion of Elias Ward had begun to shift, though not entirely in his favor. While some patients and doctors had started to admire him quietly, the mocking whispers among a few of the nurses persisted, fueled now by envy and suspicion. They noticed the way he handled emergencies, the precision of his movements, and the calm authority he carried, qualities that made them feel inferior and, for some, threatened. One evening, during a routine night shift, a group of particularly arrogant nurses decided it was time to test him. They had seen the admiration building among patients and some of the staff, and felt their superiority challenged. "Let's see if Grandpa Ward can handle a real crisis," one of them muttered under her breath. They coordinated quietly to assign him the most difficult patient, a man with multiple traumatic injuries after a high-speed motorcycle accident. As the patient was rushed in, blood gushing from several lacerations, the staff braced for disaster, expecting Elias to falter. The room was chaos. Monitors beeped frantically, doctors barked orders, and nurses scrambled, unsure of how to proceed. Yet Elias stepped forward calmly, assessing the patient with an intensity that immediately drew the attention of everyone in the room. "Traction kit now. Nurse Kim, secure the IV. Vitals monitor closely. Pressure here," he instructed, each phrase deliberate, each action precise. The others could barely keep up. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, stabilizing the patient in a way that suggested not just skill, but a deep understanding of human anatomy and trauma care far beyond what the hospital training had provided. One of the mocking nurses watched, mouth agape, as Elias executed maneuvers that seemed almost tactical. He aligned fractured bones with a skill that was almost surgical, adjusted the patient's position to minimize pain, and issued commands that everyone followed without question. Within moments, the man's condition began to stabilize, his breathing eased, and the panic in the room slowly gave way to astonishment. Even the lead doctor, a grizzled veteran of emergency medicine, paused mid-action to observe him. "I've never seen someone work like that," he muttered quietly. "Where did he learn this?" But before anyone could answer, Elias merely gave a small, polite smile. "Old training," he said, as if dismissing the question entirely. His words were almost casual, yet they carried the weight of experience that none of the staff could yet comprehend. The mocking nurses, expecting to see failure, now felt a creeping unease. The quiet nurse they had belittled had not only met the challenge but had done so flawlessly, commanding respect without a single raised voice or gesture of arrogance. Their carefully constructed plan to humiliate him had backfired spectacularly. As the night wore on, the whispers in the corridors shifted. "He's hiding something," one nurse admitted, her voice tinged with fear and curiosity. "There's no way someone this skilled just appears out of nowhere." Others nodded, their confidence shaken. For the first time, the mocking laughter ceased, replaced by cautious observation. Elias remained oblivious, or deliberately indifferent to the shifting dynamics, focused entirely on his patients and the tasks at hand. Later, during a brief lull, one of the more perceptive doctors approached him. "Elias, if you don't mind me asking," she began, lowering her voice, "where did you learn to handle trauma like that? That was remarkable." Elias paused, his gaze steady but distant. "Old training," he repeated, the familiar phrase once again providing a veil of mystery. The doctor frowned slightly, realizing she would not get a full answer, but she couldn't shake the sense that Elia's calmness and precision were born of experience few could imagine. Meanwhile, the staff who had attempted to mock him grappled with a mixture of emotions: embarrassment, awe, and growing fear. For the first time, they began to suspect that there was far more to Elias than they had ever imagined. His quiet demeanor, once considered a weakness, now seemed like a deliberate choice, a way to conceal a lifetime of skill and experience. That night, as the ER settled into relative calm, Elias moved through the corridors with his usual meticulous attention, checking monitors and speaking softly to patients. He observed his colleagues without judgment, nodding their discomfort and admiration alike. His mind, however, was never idle. Every situation, every movement was analyzed and recorded. Habits, weaknesses, tendencies, he saw them all. The subtle brilliance he displayed did not go unnoticed by patients either. A young mother, recovering from a minor surgery, watched him adjust her child's IV with gentle precision. "There's something different about him," she whispered to the nurse beside her. "He seems capable of anything." The nurse, now hesitant to mock him, nodded slowly, understanding that Elias possessed qualities far beyond the ordinary. Even as he demonstrated extraordinary skill, Elias remained humble, never flaunting his competence. This humility only deepened the mystique surrounding him. Some staff began to feel a mixture of admiration and unease, unsure how to interact with someone whose abilities were clearly exceptional, yet entirely understated. By the end of the shift, the initial mocking had transformed into cautious respect, though not without lingering envy. The staff could not deny Elias' talent, but they also could not fully comprehend it. He had faced a challenge designed to expose him as weak, and had turned it into a demonstration of expertise and authority. The quiet nurse who once drew ridicule now commanded unspoken respect through sheer competence alone. Later that night, Elias took a moment to step outside, breathing in the cool night air. He glanced toward the distant city skyline, his mind alert to subtle signs he had been trained to notice for years. There was an almost imperceptible tension in the air, something out of place. In his previous life, such instincts could mean the difference between life and death. Here, they were a quiet hum beneath the ordinary routine of hospital life, a reminder that the world outside still demanded vigilance, even in a place of healing. As he returned to the hospital, Elias continued his rounds, checking on patients with the same calm authority that had now become his trademark. He offered quiet reassurance, precise adjustments, and steady hands to those in need. The staff, once eager to belittle him, now whispered among themselves, acknowledging his skill in ways they would never have admitted openly before. Yet even as respect began to grow, the full depth of Elias Ward's past remained hidden. The scars on his forearms, the measured calm, the tactical precision, all hints of a life few could imagine, were mysteries the hospital had yet to uncover. The staff had seen glimpses of brilliance, but they had no idea how far that brilliance extended, nor the experiences that had forged it. By the end of the night, one thing was clear: the quiet nurse had changed the dynamics of the hospital, whether the staff realized it or not. He had faced mockery, skepticism, and challenge, and had emerged not just unscathed, but elevated in the eyes of those who had once doubted him. The whispers of old training were a tantalizing clue, a hint at the extraordinary story that lay just beneath the surface. And while the staff adjusted to this new understanding, Elias remained vigilant. His instincts, honed by years of rigorous and dangerous experience, told him that this was only the beginning. The calm efficiency, the silent observation, the subtle brilliance, these were all preparation for something far greater, something that would soon demand the full measure of skill, courage, and precision that he had carried hidden beneath the quiet exterior of a nurse. The mocking staff had learned a valuable lesson. Appearances can deceive, and the quietest person in the room may very well be the most capable. Yet even they could not imagine the truth. Elias Ward was not simply a brilliant nurse. He was a man shaped by extraordinary experiences, a man whose past would soon collide with the present in a way that no one at St. Mary's Hospital could have anticipated. And so, as the city slept under the blanket of night, Elias continued his rounds, each movement precise, each observation intentional. The quiet nurse they had mocked had proven his brilliance, not with words but with undeniable action. And unbeknownst to anyone around him, his true story was waiting, ready to reveal the extraordinary life behind the calm, unassuming figure who now moved quietly through the hospital halls. The hospital had settled into a quieter rhythm after the chaos of the night shift, but the calm was deceptive. Elias Ward continued his rounds with the same measured pace, checking monitors, adjusting IVs, and quietly reassuring patients. His presence had become something of a silent anchor, a constant that the staff had begun to rely on, whether they admitted it or not. Yet beneath the calm, Elias' senses were alert, scanning for anomalies in a way that most people would not even notice. It began subtly. That night as he moved through the corridors, Elias noticed a figure standing near the nurse's station, just at the edge of the security camera's range. The man was dressed in plain clothes, nondescript, blending into the background, yet his attention was focused entirely on Elias. Their eyes met briefly, and Elias' instincts tensed ever so slightly. He didn't approach, didn't react outwardly, but the tension in his posture was enough for a trained observer to notice. The visitor asked questions about Elias' schedule, casually inquiring about which shifts he preferred, how long he had been at the hospital, and which units he was assigned to. The staff, used to casual visitors and family members, barely gave him a second glance. He smiled politely, made small talk, and left just as suddenly as he had appeared. To the hospital staff, it seemed like nothing, perhaps just another concerned citizen. But to Elias it was a signal, a subtle probe, a test, and a reminder that his past was never truly behind him. That night after the shift officially ended, Elias stepped outside under the pale light of the hospital parking lot. The city was quiet, bathed in the glow of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic. Yet his eyes scanned the shadows with precision, noting every movement, every car, every person within 100 meters. His instincts, honed through years of high-stakes missions, told him that something was off. A subtle tension lingered in the air, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to him it was a warning. As he returned inside, he moved with deliberate purpose, checking on patients and quietly observing staff. The night was uneventful in terms of emergencies, but Elias' mind was far from at rest. He replayed the visitors' questions in his head, analyzing motives, evaluating potential threats, and considering the implications. The man had been precise in his inquiries, careful not to draw attention, yet direct enough to communicate that he knew exactly what, or rather who, he was looking for. Meanwhile, the hospital staff remained oblivious. They had grown used to Elias' calm, almost eerie competence. The faint scars on his forearms, the quiet demeanor, the uncanny ability to manage trauma, these were things they had noticed, whispered about, and speculated over, but never fully understood. Some began to admire him, some still envied him, and a few continued to harbor doubts about his abilities. None of them suspected that his past was not just impressive, but potentially dangerous. Later that night, as he moved through the pediatric wing, a young nurse approached him cautiously. "Elias," she said, her voice hesitant, "I saw someone asking about you earlier, a man in plain clothes. Did you know him?" Elias paused, glancing toward the window that framed the city lights. His expression remained calm, but his mind was already calculating. "No," he said softly, "but I expected someone like him would come eventually." His tone was calm, yet there was an unspoken weight behind the words. The nurse frowned, puzzled. "Someone like him? What do you mean?" Elias simply shook his head and moved on, attending to a young patient who had woken up crying. To her, his words were cryptic. To Elias, they were a reflection of a lifetime of experience, of understanding that certain events and people follow predictable patterns, and that preparedness is the only safeguard against danger. As the night progressed, Elias' routine continued uninterrupted, but he remained acutely aware of every detail around him. He noted the subtle movements of security personnel, the placement of hospital equipment, and even the pattern of shadows cast by the dim lights. Every element, no matter how mundane it appeared to others, was part of a larger picture that he was constantly analyzing. His ability to remain calm while scanning for potential threats was remarkable. Staff who watched him could only see a focused, diligent nurse. They did not realize that beneath that calm exterior lay a mind trained to anticipate danger, to react with precision, and to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Elias Ward's past had been one of high-stakes missions, secret operations, and life-or-death decisions, experiences that had honed him into someone far more than a hospital nurse. A few hours later, in the quiet of the break room, Elias reflected on the encounter with the visitor. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but he had recognized it for what it was: a signal, a test, and a reminder that the world he had once navigated with deadly precision was reaching out to him again. The skills he had set aside to live a quieter life were still very much a part of him, ready to be deployed if needed. Meanwhile, the visitor's presence had not gone unnoticed by everyone. Security footage, later reviewed, showed him lingering near the entrance, observing with careful attention. He asked questions about Elias but left without causing any disturbance. To the untrained eye, it was insignificant. To Elias, it was a clear indication that his past, his life as a highly trained, elite operative, was intersecting with the present in ways that could not be ignored. As the sun began to rise and the first light filtered into the hospital corridors, Elias finished his rounds. Patients were stable, monitors were steady, and the staff, still adjusting to his extraordinary competence, prepared for another day. Yet Elias remained alert, his mind never resting. He knew that the calm of the hospital was temporary, a fleeting moment before events that would demand the full measure of his training and experience. By the end of his shift, Elias had accomplished everything expected of him, quietly and efficiently. But unlike his colleagues, he understood that the world outside the hospital walls was not so predictable. The visitor had been a warning, a signal that the quiet life he had attempted to embrace was about to collide with the extraordinary past he had kept hidden for so long. And so, Elias Ward walked the corridors of St. Mary's Hospital with calm precision, offering reassurance to patients, guidance to staff, and silent observation of the world around him. The quiet new nurse, once mocked and underestimated, had already begun to demonstrate the extraordinary depth of his abilities. Yet even he knew that the most challenging test was still ahead, an event that would require not just his nursing skill, but the full force of the training, discipline, and courage that had defined his life long before he ever set foot in a hospital. As the morning shift arrived, unaware of the tension lurking just beneath the surface, Elias prepared himself for what was coming. The subtle signals, the unexplained questions, the faint aura of anticipation in the air, they were all pieces of a puzzle that would soon demand a response unlike any he had offered before. The quiet nurse had kept his past hidden, but that past was reaching for him now, and there would be no ignoring it. And in the halls of St. Mary's, a legend was quietly forming. A man of calm demeanor, precise skill, and enigmatic presence was being noticed in ways he had not sought. The mocking whispers, the incredulous glances, and the growing respect of his colleagues were only the beginning. Elias Ward's true story had yet to unfold, but the first pieces were now in place. A storm was coming, and the quiet nurse would soon reveal to the world the extraordinary life hidden beneath his calm exterior. The calm of St. Mary's Hospital shattered just after midnight. A nearby warehouse had collapsed, sending a cascade of debris and dust into the night. Emergency calls flooded the ER, multiple casualties, some critically injured, some trapped beneath rubble. The hospital, already accustomed to busy nights, was suddenly overwhelmed. Phones rang incessantly, alarms sounded, and staff scrambled in confusion. Panic rippled through the corridors as nurses and doctors tried to triage patients as they arrived, many in life-threatening conditions. Elia's ward, however, moved differently. He was not frantic, not hurried, not flustered. He was the eye of the storm, calm and methodical amid chaos. He immediately assessed the flow of patients and personnel, scanning the room with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. His eyes noted vital signs, bleeding severity, and the urgency of each case simultaneously. Where others saw disorder, he saw patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities for intervention. He stepped forward and, for the first time, spoke with authority that demanded attention. "Move the critical patients here. Set up triage in the second bay. Everyone else, stabilize what you can but report directly to me before making decisions," he commanded. His voice was soft yet carried a weight that left no room for argument. Nurses and doctors alike instinctively followed, the initial panic subsiding under his quiet control. Within minutes, Elias had organized the chaos into a semblance of order. He directed staff with tactical precision, assigning roles based on skill levels, observing strengths and weaknesses in real time. Even the most experienced nurses who had once mocked him found themselves following his instructions without hesitation. There was no arrogance in his tone, only clarity and purpose, and that alone commanded respect. A young construction worker was wheeled in on a stretcher, his leg mangled and bleeding profusely. The attending doctor hesitated, overwhelmed, unsure how to stabilize him quickly. Elias knelt beside the patient, assessing the injury instantly. His hands moved with swift efficiency, securing a tourniquet, administering pain relief, and preparing the wound for surgery. His movements were almost military in precision, every action deliberate, every second accounted for. One nurse, still wary of Elias, whispered to a colleague, "How does he do that? I've never seen anyone act so perfectly under pressure." The colleague shook her head. "It's like he knows exactly what's coming next." They had seen glimpses of his skill before, but the scale of his competence in a mass emergency was overwhelming. Elias was not just stabilizing patients. He was orchestrating the entire like a commander directing a battlefield operation. He anticipated complications, adjusted protocols on the fly, and managed the flow of resources with uncanny foresight. Staff began to realize that this was no ordinary nurse. The efficiency, calm, and precision he demonstrated were far beyond typical hospital training. They were instincts honed through experience in situations where hesitation could cost lives. Even as he worked, he observed subtle signals in the environment. Monitors flickered, blood pressure dropped unexpectedly in a few patients, and the more inexperienced nurses made small errors. Elias corrected them silently, guiding hands without criticism, adjusting protocols without argument. Every movement was calculated, every instruction measured, and every outcome improved. The chaos outside the hospital mirrored the storm inside. Emergency services reported more victims trapped under debris, some with critical injuries. Elias' phone rang constantly, each call another challenge, another crisis. He remained steady, issuing instructions, prioritizing cases, and ensuring that the hospital could handle the surge of patients. His calm was contagious. Panic began to fade as the staff fell into rhythm under his leadership. A particularly severe case arrived. A man pinned under a collapsed beam with internal bleeding. Doctors debated whether to move him immediately or stabilize him first. Elias stepped forward and assessed the situation in seconds. He gave precise instructions: elevate, secure, and prepare for emergency surgery. His knowledge of anatomy, trauma care, and rapid intervention was evident in every action. The attending surgeon, though experienced, followed Elias' lead, recognizing that the quiet nurse's decisions were saving precious seconds, possibly lives. As the night wore on, more casualties arrived, each presenting new challenges. Some were unconscious, others in shock, and a few barely clinging to life. Yet Elias treated each with the same methodical precision, never rushing, never panicking, never faltering. His hands were steady, his mind focused, his presence commanding without arrogance. Even those who had doubted him were forced to acknowledge his extraordinary skill. A young nurse who had mocked him just days before found herself following his orders almost instinctively. I don't understand, she admitted quietly. How is he handling all of this alone? Her colleague whispered. He's not just a nurse. There's something more to him. And they were right. Elia's ward was operating at a level far beyond ordinary medical training. Every decision, every movement, every assessment was a product of years of discipline, focus, and experience in life-and-death situations. Meanwhile, the hospital staff began to notice something else. Elias was not just managing the present emergencies. He was preparing for what might come next. He instructed staff to organize supplies for potential incoming casualties, moved stretchers and equipment into strategic positions, and coordinated with paramedics for efficient transfer. His actions were proactive, not reactive, a trait that distinguished him from everyone else in the ER. Hours passed, and the surge of patients began to stabilize under his guidance. The staff had started to rely on him almost instinctively. Even the most skeptical nurses and doctors recognized that Elia's calm and authoritative presence had saved lives that night. The quiet nurse they had once mocked was now the cornerstone of their emergency response. And then, amid the controlled chaos, a subtle but unmistakable tension rippled through Elias. His instincts, honed through years of covert operations and high-stakes missions, detected something unusual. Outside the hospital, he sensed a presence, a pattern that didn't fit. His focus remained on the patients, yet his awareness extended beyond the walls, scanning for the unfamiliar signals that only someone with his training could detect. It was in that moment of calm vigilance that Elias realized the emergency was not over. The past he had kept hidden, the training, the experiences, the missions that had shaped him, was about to intersect with the present. The hospital, the patients, the staff, they were all about to become part of a situation that required more than medical skill. It required everything he had learned in the most dangerous environments on Earth. As the sun began to rise over the city, Elias' work continued uninterrupted. Patients were stabilized, staff followed his instructions with newfound respect, and the ER slowly regained a sense of order. Yet in the back of his mind, Elias remained alert, fully aware that the challenges of the night were only the beginning. Something was coming, something that would demand not just his brilliance as a nurse, but the full measure of his extraordinary past. By the end of the shift, the hospital staff had witnessed something remarkable. The quiet, unassuming nurse had transformed into a leader under pressure, a master of organization and triage, and a calm presence that had turned chaos into order. Yet no one, not even the most observant, could guess the truth. Elias Ward was not simply a brilliant nurse. He was a man forged in extraordinary circumstances, trained to operate under pressure, and prepared to confront threats that few could imagine. And as he finally allowed himself a brief moment of rest, Elias knew that the night's events were only a prelude. The calm he had created, the lives he had saved, and the respect he had earned were significant, but the real test, the one that would reveal his true identity to everyone, had not yet arrived. The quiet nurse, once mocked and underestimated, was about to be called to a challenge unlike any he had faced within the hospital walls, a challenge that would demand the full force of his hidden past and the skills he had long kept concealed. The calm that Elias had carefully cultivated in the ER began to ripple as an unusual sound filled the air outside. The distant, rhythmic thrum of a helicopter. Staff paused mid-task, exchanging confused glances. The hospital had a helipad, but it was rarely used for anything other than routine patient transfers. Yet the low, powerful hum of rotors approaching in the dead of night immediately drew attention. Elias was the first to notice. He glanced toward the ceiling-to-floor windows of the emergency entrance, observing the shadowed silhouette of the helicopter against the night sky. His instincts, honed over years of high-stakes operations, told him that this was no ordinary medevac. He didn't speak. He didn't panic. Instead, he adjusted his stance, subtly assessing entrances, exits, and potential security issues. The helicopter landed with a precise thump on the hospital's helipad, the downdraft rattling the doors and papers inside the ER. The staff hurried to the windows, craning their necks to get a better view. A team of uniformed Navy personnel disembarked with practiced efficiency, moving with urgency that immediately set Elia's senses on high alert. Their movements were precise, deliberate, and trained, not the chaotic rush typical of a civilian emergency. One of the Navy officers, a tall man with a commanding presence, approached the front desk and spoke with authority. "Where is Chief Petty Officer Elias Ward?" His voice carried an urgency that cut through the confusion. Staff froze. They had only known Elias as the quiet, meticulous nurse who rarely spoke, never drew attention, and certainly didn't fit the profile of someone in the military. Elias, calm as ever, stepped forward. The room seemed to go silent around him. The Navy officer's gaze locked on him, eyes sharp, scanning for recognition. "It's him," someone whispered under their breath. Elias' presence immediately commanded attention, as though he were the pivot around which the entire situation revolved. "Chief Petty Officer Ward," the officer said firmly, "we need you for an urgent mission. Your expertise is required immediately." Elias' expression remained neutral, though his eyes, normally calm, almost serene, revealed a flicker of readiness. He had expected this day, had anticipated that his past would catch up with him, and now it had arrived. The staff of St. Mary's Hospital could hardly believe what they were witnessing. The quiet nurse who had been mocked and underestimated was now being summoned by the Navy itself. The whispers grew louder. "He's a SEAL. No way, that's impossible." They stared, stunned, as Elias nodded curtly and moved toward the helicopter. Before leaving, he addressed the staff with quiet authority. "Continue care as instructed. Remain calm. Follow procedures," he said softly. His words were brief, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Those who had once doubted him now understood that he was someone extraordinary. His calm, precise command carried the authority of someone who had been in life-or-death situations far beyond the hospital's walls. As Elias prepared to board, one of the nurses stepped forward hesitantly. "Wait, you're a Navy SEAL." Her voice trembled with awe and disbelief. Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he simply tightened his grip on his medical bag, adjusted his posture, and gave the faintest of nods. That small gesture spoke volumes. He had lived a life of service and danger, yet humility defined him more than pride. The helicopter doors closed and the rotors began to spin again, lifting the aircraft into the night sky. Inside, Elias joined the SEAL team, their movements coordinated, almost choreographed as they prepared for a high-priority operation. He slipped seamlessly into his role, shifting from hospital nurse to combat medic, the transition fluid, almost second nature. The quiet demeanor, meticulous hands, and calm precision that had characterized him in the ER now took on a new dimension. Trained skill applied under extreme pressure. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, the staff was left in stunned silence. The mocking whispers of days before had been replaced by awe, admiration, and a lingering sense of disbelief. Nurses who had doubted him now exchanged looks of shame, realizing they had underestimated someone whose bravery and skill were far beyond their imagination. Even the most experienced doctors were impressed by the realization that the quiet nurse had a history few could even comprehend. The helicopter flew swiftly, cutting across the city skyline. Elias' mind, as always, was alert and analytical. Every detail was noted: wind direction, potential threats, the condition of his team, and the resources available for the mission. He didn't speak unnecessarily, but his presence radiated confidence and command. Each SEAL beside him recognized the competence and experience in his every movement. He was not just another member of the team. He was their combat medic, their anchor, their professional equal in life-or-death scenarios. Inside the aircraft, he reviewed the mission details briefly. A high-risk operation required his medical expertise and tactical knowledge, the kind of operation that would challenge any ordinary medic. But Elias was not ordinary. Every procedure, every technique, Every emergency he had mastered in the hospital had been honed from real-world combat scenarios, situations that demanded rapid decisions, unshakable composure, and exceptional skill. As the helicopter descended toward the operation site, Elias adjusted his gear with methodical precision. His calm exterior masked the readiness and focus that surged within him. He had trained for moments like this for years, facing environments far more dangerous than any hospital emergency. The team around him respected his authority without question. They knew that in critical moments, he would be the difference between life and death. Back at St. Mary's, the hospital slowly returned to routine, but the atmosphere had changed forever. The staff who had once mocked him now whispered his name with reverence. The quiet nurse, so unassuming and humble, had revealed himself as someone extraordinary, someone who had faced dangers that none of them could imagine. The helicopter's roar fading into the distance left a lingering sense of awe and anticipation, a realization that the ordinary world had brushed against the extraordinary, and that Elias Ward was a man capable of bridging both. By the time the morning sun began to rise, Elias and the SEAL team were already in motion, his role as combat medic fully activated. The calm authority, the measured precision, the analytical mind, all the qualities that had made him an exceptional nurse, now translated directly to the battlefield. The quiet man who had walked the hospital corridors with careful attention to detail was now a warrior prepared to face imminent danger, his experience and training proving invaluable to the mission at hand. And while the staff of St. Mary's Hospital resumed their daily routines, they did so with a new perspective. The man they had once mocked was no longer just a nurse. He was a hero, a highly trained operative whose bravery and skill had saved countless lives and would continue to do so in ways they could only begin to imagine. Elias Ward's story, once hidden behind quiet competence and subtle brilliance, was now beginning to unfold in full. The SEAL team and the high-stakes mission ahead were the next chapter, a chapter that would reveal not just his skill as a medic, but his extraordinary courage, resilience, and ability to face danger head-on. The quiet nurse had finally stepped out of the shadows of anonymity into a role that demanded everything he had ever learned. The helicopter's rotors cut through the dawn air as Elias prepared himself mentally for the challenges ahead. Calm, precise, and ready, he embodied the perfect combination of a healer and a warrior. The hospital staff could only watch, remembering the quiet man who had walked among them, never speaking much, always observing, always ready. They would never forget that night, or the man who had shown them the true meaning of competence, courage, and quiet brilliance. The night air was thick with tension as the helicopter descended toward the remote industrial complex. Elias Ward, calm and focused, prepared his gear, checking each strap, medical kit, and tactical tool with meticulous care. The SEAL team around him moved with silent efficiency, each member understanding their roles and trusting in the expertise of those beside them. But it was clear that Elias, despite being one of the quietest members of the team, commanded unspoken authority. The mission briefing had been concise. A rogue armed group had trapped hostages within the complex. Intelligence suggested injuries among both hostages and attackers, and time was critical. As the helicopter touched down, dust and debris swirled violently in the rotor wash. Elias' eyes scanned the perimeter, noting exits, cover points, and potential threats. Every instinct honed over years of covert operations sharpened in the chaos. "Team positions," Elias commanded softly but firmly, immediately taking control of the medical readiness for the team. He inspected each operator, confirming that medical kits were accessible, tourniquets ready, and extraction protocols memorized. Unlike the hospital, where emergencies were controlled and predictable, this was a dynamic battlefield where every decision could be fatal. The team moved in silence, slipping through shadows and corridors of the abandoned complex. Elias led the medical assessment of the hostages first, quickly determining the most critically injured and stabilizing them on site. His hands were steady, precise, moving with a speed and skill that amazed even the most seasoned operators. A young hostage with a deep leg wound was in shock. Elias immediately applied a tourniquet, elevated the limb, and administered pain relief, all in under a minute, while simultaneously directing another operator to secure the area. Explosions echoed through the building as the team advanced. Elias' mind remained a calm center amid chaos, analyzing threats, anticipating enemy movements, and prioritizing medical attention. His knowledge of anatomy and trauma care, previously admired in the hospital ER, now became a literal lifeline for those in danger. Operators who had never met him before quickly learned to defer to his judgment when it came to stabilizing injured team members. An enemy combatant lunged from a dark corridor, and a SEAL teammate engaged him in a swift hand-to-hand maneuver. Elias moved instinctively, stepping aside yet remaining in position to assist any injuries that might occur. Every motion was economical, deliberate, and effective. He was a healer and a warrior simultaneously, blending medical skill with battlefield awareness. The complexity of the mission escalated as the team encountered booby traps and barricades designed to slow their advance. Elias adjusted quickly, helping operators navigate without risking further injury to hostages or themselves. He patched wounds under fire, provided guidance on tactical movement to minimize harm, and maintained a level of calm that inspired confidence. At one point, a hostage, a young woman, screamed in pain from a collapsed ceiling beam. Elias was instantly at her side, assessing her injuries with practiced efficiency. Broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, and shock were apparent. He instructed a nearby operator to hold steady while he applied rapid stabilization techniques. Using improvised splints and careful positioning, he managed to stabilize her enough for extraction, all while the team continued to secure the compound. Time became a blur. Seconds and minutes mattered, each carrying the weight of life or death. Yet Elias' presence ensured order within chaos. The SEALs, trained for extreme situations, recognized the difference between an average medic and someone extraordinary. Elias' ward was extraordinary. Calm, analytical, decisive, and precise, he seemed almost untouchable amidst the chaos. An injured SEAL team member slumped under fire, and Elias dove to his aid without hesitation. Bullets ricocheted around him, dust choked the air, and explosions shook the floor. Yet his focus never wavered. He applied a tourniquet, administered IV fluids, and stabilized the wounded operator for evacuation, all in the middle of an active combat zone. Every movement was precise, deliberate, and unflinchingly confident. The hostages, once terrified, began to sense the calm authority of Elias. Even in the most desperate moments, his presence was reassuring. He whispered instructions and reassurances, maintaining control while assessing injuries, all while the SEAL team neutralized threats around them. The combination of his medical expertise and battlefield composure created a rare balance that saved lives. The climax of the mission arrived as the team faced the main armed group holding the final hostages. The building's layout was confusing, dark, and treacherous. Elias moved at the front, assessing both the structural hazards and the medical needs of anyone who might be injured. A firefight erupted, forcing the team to dive for cover. Amid gunfire and chaos, Elias stayed focused, ready to provide immediate care to anyone injured, friend or foe. He reached a wounded hostage hiding under debris, unconscious and bleeding from a head injury. Without hesitation, he applied a pressure bandage, secured the airway, and monitored vitals, all while coordinating with the team on extraction routes. His calm, efficient presence gave confidence to those around him and ensured the mission could proceed without unnecessary delays or casualties. By the time the last hostages were secured and the enemy neutralized, Elias had worked tirelessly for over an hour, his hands steady, his mind sharp, and his judgment flawless. The SEAL team and the rescued hostages were alive because of his unique combination of medical expertise and tactical experience. Every operator in the team recognized it. Elias Ward was not just a nurse or a medic. He was a SEAL, A combat expert, a healer, and a strategist rolled into one. When the helicopter finally lifted off to extract the team and hostages, the adrenaline slowly began to ebb. Elias remained vigilant, checking patients and team members, ensuring no complications arose during the flight. His calm, focused demeanor reassured the hostages, many of whom had feared for their lives moments before. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Elias' mind remained active, reflecting on the mission and the lives saved. This was the reality he had trained for, the life he had once lived and had tried to set aside. The hospital, the quiet routines, and the patient care had been a way to channel his skills peacefully. Yet when called, he became the man he was truly trained to be, precise, courageous, and unwavering under pressure. Back at St. Mary's Hospital, staff would later hear about the incident, stunned at the revelation. The quiet nurse they had once mocked had not only been a hero in the ER, but had performed feats of skill, courage, and leadership that few could imagine outside military operations. His past, once hidden behind humility and quiet competence, had been revealed in a dramatic display of life-saving heroism. And yet Elias remained humble. The SEALs, hostages, and rescue teams knew the truth, but he did not boast. He had done what was necessary, applying every ounce of skill, training, and experience to save lives. The quiet nurse from St. Mary's Hospital was, in reality, one of the most capable, disciplined, and extraordinary individuals in the country, a SEAL and a healer whose actions that night would be remembered by those he saved forever. As the helicopter landed at a secure location, Elias checked on each patient and operator once more, his mind already planning the next steps. Calm, efficient, and precise, he had fulfilled his duty, yet he knew the world was unpredictable. There would be more emergencies, more threats, and more moments where his unique combination of medical expertise and combat training would be required. For the SEALs, the mission had proven one undeniable fact: Elias Ward was exceptional. For the hostages, he had been a lifeline. And for the hospital staff who had doubted him, they would never again underestimate the quiet, brilliant man who had walked among them. The unassuming nurse was gone from their sight, but the legend of his courage, skill, and humility would endure long after. The helicopter landed back at the military base as dawn stretched across the horizon. Elias Ward stepped out, the cool morning air brushing against his face. He was calm, composed, and collected as always. His hands were steady, his movements precise, his eyes clear. But beneath that calm exterior was the weight of what had just occurred, the lives saved, the dangers faced, the chaos navigated with unwavering skill. He had performed miracles that few could ever comprehend. After a brief debrief with the SEAL team and medical officers, Elias returned to St. Mary's Hospital. The journey back in a standard vehicle, blending into the ordinary world, felt strangely surreal. Only he knew the depth of the night's events, the tactical decisions, the rapid triage under fire, the improvisations that had saved hostages, the split-second judgments that had prevented fatalities. To the rest of the world, he was simply Elias Ward, nurse. As he entered the hospital lobby, staff immediately noticed him. The night shift had ended, but a few nurses lingered, tidying supplies or preparing for the next shift. Their faces reflected a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and deep respect. Some had doubted him, some had mocked him. But now, silence filled the room as they watched the quiet man who had just performed extraordinary feats beyond their imagination. One of the nurses who had openly ridiculed him days ago stepped forward, hesitating. Her voice trembled slightly. "Elias, we heard. We know what happened." She struggled to find words. Elias offered a faint, understanding smile, the kind that suggested forgiveness and humility. "It's not about recognition," he said quietly. "It's about doing what needs to be done." His words were simple, yet profound. The staff began to realize the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The quiet nurse, the man who had silently moved through hospital corridors with calm precision, was more than they had ever imagined. He had faced life-or-death situations in the ER, and then on a battlefield-like mission, demonstrating courage, skill, and leadership in ways that left the staff both awed and humbled. In the following days, Elias resumed his role at the hospital, quietly tending to patients and guiding staff with the same calm authority as before. Yet the atmosphere had changed. Whispers of admiration replaced the earlier mockery. Nurses who had doubted him now watched with newfound respect, often seeking his guidance during complex procedures. Doctors who had once questioned his methods now deferred to his judgment in emergencies, recognizing the wisdom and skill behind his quiet demeanor. One morning, as Elias prepared medication for a patient recovering from surgery, the lead doctor approached him. "Elias, I want to apologize," she said, her tone sincere. "I never fully understood your experience, your skill. You've shown us all what true competence and courage look like." Elias nodded calmly. "Thank you, but we all have our roles. My job is to ensure people survive and recover. That's all that matters." His humility shone through, as it always had, despite the extraordinary life he had led. The hospital staff slowly began to share stories of the night he had left for the SEAL mission. Casual reports filtered in, witnesses who had seen the Navy helicopter, colleagues who had received news from military contacts, and patients who had heard fragments of the extraordinary mission. Elias became something of a legend within St. Mary, not for fame, but for the undeniable proof of his courage, skill, and unwavering dedication. Despite the accolades and whispers, Elias remained the same calm, focused, and observant man. He did not seek recognition or admiration. His fulfillment came from quietly ensuring the safety and well-being of those around him. The hospital had once mocked the quiet nurse, but now they understood that his brilliance was not loud or boastful. It was measured, precise, and profound. Even patients began to notice the difference. A young mother who had witnessed his composure during an emergency came to the nurse's station one afternoon. I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "You saved my son, and you're extraordinary." Elias offered a gentle smile. "I'm just doing my job. That's all any of us can do." His modesty only deepened the admiration people felt, as they realized true heroism often hid behind quiet humility. The staff who had once mocked him experienced a profound transformation. Their jealousy and doubt gave way to respect, humility, and in some cases, inspiration. They began to emulate his calm under pressure, his attention to detail, and his unwavering focus on patient care. Elias Ward had become more than a nurse. He had become a teacher without even intending to, showing by example the rare qualities of patience, precision, and courage. Yet the past was never far from Elias. The SEAL mission had reminded him that the world contained dangers that ordinary people could not anticipate. The skills, training, and instincts he had cultivated over years of service would always remain a part of him. But he had found balance, applying them now in a place of healing rather than warfare, saving lives without the destruction and chaos of combat. The hospital administration, once skeptical of the quiet, observant nurse, began to recognize his contributions formally. Though Elias did not seek awards, they insisted on acknowledging him with a ceremony for his extraordinary actions both in the ER and during the SEAL mission. Colleagues from both medical and military backgrounds attended, sharing stories, expressing admiration, and celebrating a man whose life bridged two worlds in ways that seemed almost mythical. During the ceremony, Elias spoke softly, his words deliberate and sincere. "I've always believed that every life matters, whether on the battlefield or in a hospital bed. Courage is not loud, skill is not flashy. True service is quiet and steady, and it is shared with those who need it most." His audience listened in rapt attention, many moved to tears, as they realized the depth of his dedication, the humility of his character, and the extraordinary courage that had defined his life. Even as recognition spread, Elias continued his work with unwavering focus. He returned to the ER, tending to patients with the same calm authority that had once been mocked but was now revered. Every day was a continuation of the same mission, to heal, to guide, and to protect. He remained the quiet observer, the precise practitioner, the unwavering presence in the face of chaos. The hospital, forever changed by his presence, embraced a culture of respect, humility, and excellence. Nurses and doctors learned to work with precision and composure, inspired by the example of the quiet man who had walked among them. Patients who had witnessed his calm in emergencies carried stories of courage and reassurance, spreading the legend of Elias Ward far beyond the hospital walls. And though he remained humble, Elias knew the truth of his own life. He had bridged two worlds, navigating the extremes of danger and compassion, violence and healing. The mocking that once greeted him had transformed into respect and admiration, but the essence of who he was had never changed. Quiet, precise, courageous, and dedicated, he was a healer and a warrior, and his story would live on in the lives he had saved, the lessons he had imparted, and the example he had set. As evening fell over St. Mary's Hospital, Elias walked the familiar corridors once more. Patients rested in their beds, monitors beeped steadily, and nurses moved with calm efficiency. He paused for a moment, observing the staff in action, noting the subtle improvements and the growing confidence they carried. A faint smile crossed his face. He had come full circle, not as a hero seeking recognition, but as a man quietly ensuring that others were capable, prepared, and safe. In the end, Elias Ward remained exactly what he had always been, the quiet nurse who saved lives with precision, skill, and humility. The helicopter, the mission, the accolades, they were significant but secondary to the work he continued each day. The staff, patients, and community had come to understand one undeniable truth. True courage is quiet, true skill is steady, and true heroes do not always seek recognition. They simply do what must be done. And so, life at St. Mary's returned to its rhythm, forever influenced by the quiet man who had walked among them. Elias Ward, the unassuming nurse with extraordinary skills, remained vigilant, prepared, and dedicated. He had faced mockery, chaos, and danger, and emerged as a symbol of courage, humility, and unwavering service. The quiet hero had proven that sometimes, the person least expected to lead is the one who makes the greatest difference, and his story would resonate long after the events of that extraordinary night.